Hi, everyone. The slides are available there at bit.ly, Mobilism-Lyza. I tend to talk fairly fast, so if you want to follow along, they are available as of right now, so go right ahead. We're going to talk a little bit today about content. It's a little bit more abstract than my normal presentations. I am a dev, but you know what? I got wrapped up in some mind experiments, so here we go. So on April 20th of this year, I had a dream about M&Ms, those little chocolate candies. Here you have Smarties, but I do know you also have M&Ms, so you should know what I'm talking about. So I had a dream, and in this dream, my entire world was constructed of M&Ms. Enormous piles of M&Ms, actual M&M mountains, entire seas of M&Ms, with M&M waves and M&M seabirds, and M&M clouds that occasionally even released M&M rain showers on me. Now, in my dream, I was free to roam this M&M world at will, this fantastical world, and yet all I could think about for some obsessive reason was how I was going to free and liberate all of those little pieces of chocolate from their individual candy shell cases. Well, in my dream, I tried this in a number of ways. I tried using an enormous hammer. I tried using needle-nose pliers. And I even used this big, giant sort of cheese grater thing to try to grate the outside of the M&Ms off of the chocolate inside. But I found that no matter what I tried, I could not free the chocolate, liberate it, without destroying part of it in the process. It turns out that removing chocolate from M&Ms is kind of impossible. So I woke thinking about M&Ms, feeling that I had let down the noble individual pieces of chocolate in the world by failing to liberate them, and also feeling a little weird, because that's a pretty weird dream. On the day before I had this dream, we received a very typical customer request. We hear these sort of things all the time. Now at Cloud4, we make websites, and we are especially attuned to making websites that work very well on mobile devices, although the goal is increasingly to work in as many places as possible. So this being 2012, most of our customers already have a website, right? And are often looking to us for advice of how to get mobile or into other formats comfortably and quickly. Now, alas, this is the HTML source for this customer's current desktop-oriented landing page on their website. Now, you can see that all the beautiful content they have, and I can assure you it's a pretty interesting site. They've got a lot of really neat stuff on it. It's all forever trapped in this very convoluted structure with a whole bunch of HTML, but not good HTML, like the kind with inline styles and deeply nested arbitrary div elements and a whole bunch of messy stuff in Flash presentations. And because I am familiar with the actual underlying software system that drives this website, I can assure you that this content is fairly convoluted to its very core. So I started thinking about my dream again, and I started realizing the connection between my dream and my reality. You see, my job is becoming metaphorically increasingly similar to trying to get chocolate out of M&Ms. Repurposing this customer's content to work on mobile, which is their short-term goal, or really in any other format, would be akin to trying to get this chocolate from inside the M&Ms. And these themes of entangled content and content liberation are things that have really been on my mind for several months. So what do I mean when I say that something on the web is an M&M or has M&M-like qualities? What am I talking about? Well, I'll take a moment to fall on my own sword to give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. Take one for the team here. Now, these are actual embarrassing excerpts from my own older personal site. I had a WordPress blog, and these are from the post database table in the content field. So this is stuff that's actually in, unfortunately, the core content of my blog post. Now, these are things that I have done despite my ostensible many years' experience on the web and a general understanding of how content should work on the web. I've done this anyway. I've inadvertently created M&Ms. So in this example, I'm innocently trying to include a SlideShare presentation. Whoops, I've now made an M&M. I've munged in a whole bunch of syndicated content, a bunch of divs with inline styles and a Flash presentation, right into the source content of the rest of this blog post. Whoops. And this makes for a pretty sad state of affairs if I try to, say, view this blog post on a mobile device that doesn't support Flash, which is to say basically all of them. Well, now I have this content that's pretty difficult to repurpose for the different places I want to use it without performing some invasive and rather personalized exorcism. And here again, unintentionally, I didn't mean to immortalize this snippet of JavaScript analytics tracking code. It's not even from my own site permanently, but there it is in my content forever. And even little snippets as basic as this, when they're in my source content itself, can tend to ruin my day because this styling does not flex to all the places that I would really, really like to use this content. So now my blog post, the source content. What is the source content of my blog post? It's munged in with some syndicated content. It's melted down with combining actual meaningful semantic content with information about its layout and presentation, and information that is in my core content that is relevant to an increasingly smaller slice of the web. So there are lots of ways that this crap gets into our content. It's happened over the years, and it's happened to all of us. And again, it's stuff that's relevant to an increasingly smaller piece of the web. And we have, over time, built systems that tend to encourage this combination of content and presentation. My own WYSIWYG editor, shame on me for using it, made me look like a foolish sheep. Our tools can trip us up by blinding us a little bit to what we're actually creating with their layers of abstraction. Now, this is not to say that abstraction should go away. I'm not suggesting we get rid of all of our tools and start writing our content using, say, assembly code or binary. But it does point out that sometimes what we can't see does hurt us. Another way that we create these problems for ourselves is that we understructure big blobs of content. Instead of breaking it down into more manageable chunks, we lose ourselves in the noise, and then to try to impose an arbitrary sense of control over these big blobs of content, we create complex and weird and often messy, specific, format-specific templating systems or just sort of things that aren't necessarily best practices. We bog ourselves down, and we restrict what we can do with that content in the future. And then sometimes, on the other hand, we take relatively simple content, and we overstructure it. We set it loose in these unfortunate Byzantine database structures where it's sort of sitting there rotting, munged in together with a lot of data that might not even be content. What are people going to do with this structure in 5, 10 years? Or if some future humanity stumbles upon this, how will they ever know what we were trying to say? Lost and forever, sort of scattered to the wind. And more controversially, I guess, we often use HTML and other web technologies in ways that they were not intended, and actually this is awesome. Sometimes we're being very creative. Sometimes we're creating bridge solutions to problems that just don't have any other solution in our current technologies. Sometimes we're just pushing the edges of things. But we have to be careful, because these things that make the web so intrinsically wonderful to work with creatively can also treat us with a double-edged sword if we're not careful. You see, we're making decisions now that may inadvertently restrict what we can do with our content in the future, so we have to watch out. One thing that particularly bothers me and just gets on my nerves a lot these days is the way that CSS floats cause us to tend to break the semantic glue of the web. How many times have I caught myself throwing in an extra div or 40 to try to get a CSS float to behave? I mean, there's examples in the past that we know about for this. We know about table layouts, spacer gifs, wonderful creative intuitive leaps at the time, but with consequential echoes even now. We have to be careful our decisions influence our future. So the long and short of it is, we've been creating these web M&Ms for many years, and now we're starting to come to the realization that we'd quite like our chocolate back, actually, just the source chocolate. We're starting to really understand the importance of content on the web. I think you guys are really getting it. I've been hearing it for a couple of years now. The echoes of content first are starting to amplify across the web, actually. But it is very difficult for us to repurpose this M&M-based infrastructure we've created for the future of the web. The mobile revolution has given this to us. It has put this on our plate. It has come to a head because of all the types of different devices and browsers and clients accessing our content and viewing our content. I think that we're very good as, to use jargon, inflection point. Stop and think, review what we're doing, be mindful, and continue to make sure we're not letting this get ahead of us. I mean, this is really about the future of the web as a whole. And I do believe that if we stay mindful, we pay attention, and we continue to set our content free, the web continues to have a beautiful future in front of it. So, at the end of 2011, Jason and I had just finished working on a very long project. We were writing a book about developing for the mobile web. I was feeling extraordinarily punchy. I was feeling a little bit of cabin fever. I was feeling curious. I've been thinking about these things about content and having weird dreams, as it turns out. And I really wanted to do an academic exercise in which I could look at some of these ideas about what is content on the web. At the same time, our company, Cloud4, needed a new website. In fact, I would say it desperately needed a new website. So this timing was fantastic. It was also the holiday season. Things were just a little bit quieter than the usual, so I got my chance. Now, being cussed and overly curious, I couldn't resist kind of making a bit of a big splash in the pond, reinventing processes, reinventing wheels, getting in everyone's way. So before I forget for a moment, I work with some amazingly talented people, Cloud4. Thank you for putting up with me. I didn't necessarily express what I was up to very well, and I was doing a lot of sort of obnoxious getting in people's faces. So like I said, we needed a new website. No, we desperately needed a new website. I'm not going to show you our old website because, like I said, we desperately need a new website. Now, not everyone in our organization is a hardcore coder or implementer or technical, but everyone wanted to contribute. And by using a truly content-forward approach in the way that we dealt with our new website, we could be sure to include everyone. So we started with content. We actually forcefully pushed aside a few of the early website project distractions and instead focused on what we wanted to say about our company, what we're doing, what we're up to, and what excites us. And then, once we had a general content plan in the bag, as we would say in our parlance, our information architecture was ready to go. We knuckled down, we executed on that content, and we wrote it. Now, we used, or I should probably realistically say I imposed, the Markdown formatting language to write our content for this project. And the Markdown formatting language is a plaintext notation that allows one to generate plaintext content with relative ease and speed. For the non-technical among us, this allowed us to do this, and for the HTML savvy among us, it allowed us to generate content faster and without getting distracted by some of the markup that comes out the other end. So I think many of you are familiar with Markdown. John Gruber and Aaron Swartz's lightweight formatting notation that allows regular people to write plain text but structured content with ease, and for humans and robots to be able to read and write, or read and understand that information and to translate it quite easily to HTML. Now, Markdown does not have a corner on the market in terms of simplified formatting notations. There are a number that you may have heard of or used, and there's many more than this. And even among Markdown, there's a number of different flavors and varieties these days. I think you could even say that there's a Cloud4 flavor of Markdown after this project as well. So we wrote our content in Markdown, and then we translated it to HTML. Now, the translation from Markdown as content to HTML is no longer a single use for users who are technically savvy. And then in addition, and this is important, we threw in a bit of special sauce, because I like to think of metadata as the special sauce for the translation of content for the web. And this gives our robots the context and information they need to get their jobs done, which in this case is really simple. It's just generating an HTML website, right? And the resulting HTML is semantic because it's created by robots. It's entirely based on the content underneath it with no room to cheat. The design serves the content instead of the other way around. And this entire site built on this content-first philosophy. And then this beautiful design by our creative director, Aileen, can comfortably flex and flow for different environments using all the whiz-bang stuff we want to do. Beautiful. But it still remains true to the content beneath it. So another way of putting this is that we took our core content. We added some cross-format information, stuff that would be true to any format that we would use this in, design cues and certain design assets. And then we threw in some special sauce, some metadata, some format-specific special information that helped our robots translate this out for the HTML that they were building. Now, granted, we were speaking HTML, and the robots can then speak whatever language is needed. We were speaking HTML, but by using just a little bit different special sauce, those robots could just as easily be outputting structured JSON, XML, ebook, whatever we need in terms of these different web-friendly formats. So at this point, there's probably a few of you like, OK, that's extra special, but why are you doing this? Why not just use HTML and be done with it? I mean, HTML has been with us since the dawn of the web. It's a wonderful thing. It's gotten us this far. Am I having some sort of weird, illicit love affair with Pandoc and Markdown? Like, what's with me? What's my beef with HTML? Now, I will admit a certain personal preference when I'm actually writing content, like writing words for this plain text format versus dealing directly with the HTML that comes out. Because I feel like I can get closer, I can type it faster, I can read it a little easier. But this is entirely a personal preference, and I recognize that. And I do know that Markdown is sort of a tool for exploration, but it's not like the end of where I'm going here, the end of where we're going. This, for example, is an excerpt from the HTML source of our website. It's our contact information. And here I've opted for the HCard microformat because of the structural data it inherently carries with the markup itself. Markdown can't get me here. This microformat is an agreed-upon way that I can exchange this information so that browsers and machines and robots accessing your site understand this and can parse it as the kind of contact information I mean. And this is probably the Achilles heel. Markdown provides no inherent way of encapsulating chunks of content within a longer chunk of content, much as we've been able to do for a very long time with things like HTML classes. Now, I did extend Markdown because I saw no way around this for our project. So our Cloud 4 flavored Markdown can do this. We can encapsulate content. But Markdown does not inherently provide a way to do this. And I understand that you can't get too attached to a particular technology or combination approaches because it has the potential to make everything look like a nail that needs to be whacked at with my Pandoc and Markdown hammer. So I want to assure you that this is not an exercise or an adventure. It's about ditching HTML in favor of some new pet sexy technology as much as it is about inclusion and making sure that we're making the right choices to include and be able to deliver content and data to the new things that are increasingly the web, that are coming online, the things that we don't even know about, the things that we can't even envision. We can't make the kind of assumptions we've been making for in our desktop web of the past. Like, we don't even know there's going to be a screen for display, or if there's even only going to be one screen if there is a screen. So we can't make these kinds of assumptions. But yes, to paraphrase Jeffrey Zeltman, HTML is the DNA of the web. It is absolutely in there. It's always been there. It's a wonderful thing. It's cool. It's not my beef. But I think I'm getting a little wrapped up with this content stuff. I'm like really sucked in. And I think what I'm doing, perhaps, I have a tendency to worry, is that I'm looking a little bit bigger than the browser. Now, I hope it can be, but I'm not totally certain that HTML can always be all things to everyone at all times. Maybe it can be, that would be awesome. But by staying really flexible with the kind of decisions we're making right now about our content, we have a lot more options as we move into the future. I think, we've been peeling back onions all day, but we're going to do a little bit more peeling of them. I think it's about peeling back the onion layers that surround our content, doing this investigation, getting close to it, crying uncontrollably from the fumes, and then resuming our lives with a slightly increased understanding of the content we're working with. For me, it's just this academic exercise of distilling the notion of what content is and trying to figure out, what do I even mean when I'm talking about content on the web? I mean, what is content? What is its essence on the web? It's such an obnoxiously abstract concept. It's so vague. So maybe it will help to look at an example here, because it's really hard to pin down. So for a lot of you, at some point, as that last slide played, this iconic image by artist Milton Glaser may well have jumped into your head. It's pretty recognizable, right? But at what point? At what level of abstraction was there enough of the original intent of the message from that original artwork that it did pop into your head? Okay, I'm going to wax philosophical here for a couple of minutes, and I'm warning you. According to the philosopher Plato, that Greek philosopher, every chair, and we're talking about chairs here, but bear with me, every chair you ever see in the real world is merely a pale imitation of the one true ideal form of a chair. So there's this ideal form, the perfect chair. It exists in some universe we can't get to because we're imperfect human beings, right? But it's there. And every chair we see in the real world is merely an imitation of this. And yet, every chair in the real world shares this universal human understood common quality of chairness, right? So every time we see a chair in the real world, no matter how different it is, we recognize it as a chair because of these inherent shared chairnesses. And that's sort of common with a lot of other things. We recognize things because they share a ness quality. So with chairs, specifically, we end up with this scale. On the left, we have all possible chairs embodied by that perfect, unknowable, ideal form of chair. And then on the very right, we have the opposite. We have the most specific instantiation of a real-world chair. Specific color, lit in a specific way, like sitting in a particular house in a particular time of year in a particularly boring suburb covered with a particular amount, perhaps, of pet hair. And then when we talk about content on the web, I think these things are true as well. So with Milton Glaser's image, on the far left, you have all possible forms of this message, the universal meaning of it. And on the very right, you have a particular, very specific expression of that in a very particular way. And as we move from left to right, we trade in a certain amount of flexibility and fluidity and portability of that message for specificity and control. And when we're talking about content on the web, I think we're talking about something in the middle. So I guess if you boil this down, you could say that my pursuit for understanding content involves a lot of the quest for finding an appropriate level of ness, of commonality. Because I think that ness gives us that flexibility and fluidity that is so wonderful about the web. For me, this particular plain text representation of the I love New York message gives me just enough information from the original message that it does pop into my head. This is its stripped down version for me. And it does provide some semantic clues if we want to express this message in another format. So I can hand it off to the robots and say, give me HTML back. We're dealing with a Unicode heart here, so we're OK in this case. And I get that. But I could just as easily translate it to JSON or any other number of formats. But let's say we're working with HTML for the moment. I can add this special sauce that informs the translation of this content out for the consumers that want HTML and are, say, browsers. And what I end up with is this visual web-based representation, perfect for the web, that actually pushes us a little bit further toward the right side of that scale and gives us a little bit more detail in the rendering of that message. And I think in the future, we're going to see a demand on us to be able to format switch, to flow to and from these different formats back and forth easily as we're delivering this content and application and data to different applications and clients. And there is a universal stated goal among a lot of us to figure this out. This is an excerpt from the Future Friendly site. You've probably seen this a few times in some talks. And it reads, in part, be bold and explore new possibilities, but know that the future is likely to head in many directions. And this is under the heading about universal content, so thinking about the way we want to think about our content. So we know we don't know anything, right? We know that we're headed into a future we can't predict. So I think that what we face is a challenge in finding in our content the right balance between flexibility and control. Now, I've talked a bit about too much control. You know, we end up with web M&Ms. We're imposing too much restricting information about the representation of that content for it to be able to translate effectively to the different formats where it's needed. But if we err to the side of too much flexibility, likewise, we actually run the risk of losing the original ness in the message, right? So there's risks on either side. So these were the things I was thinking about as we went into redesigning our website. They're very abstract notions, but things that kind of keep me up awake at night. And I understood that this isn't going to come out with me understanding the true language of the universe. I wasn't going to discover the all-common content language that we could all use and hold hands and sing. But I could be able to make investigations and ask questions like, how did we get to our end markup? How did we get to what we're delivering from what we started with? What kind of translations happened, be they human or robots, that are making these leaps to markup? I mean, this may well be a perfectly acceptable end result, but how did we get here? So I'll use by way of example this page on our website. This is the single page on our site that did not start from content. Instead, we went straight to markup with this. This is our events calendar, which lists all the different events that Cloud 4 principals are going to be hanging out at in the next few months, including this lovely one itself. And if I look at it and then look up at the content, HTML source here, I find that I got a little distracted. So the thing is that I've been writing HTML for a very long time. I'm sure many of you have. And I understand that it can be a semantic vehicle, but you can also do other things with it. And sometimes I lose my focus. Like here. Like, what is this doing here? Aha, OK, it's a marker for a map. OK, each event has a map, and it has a little marker. How clever. Now, those maps themselves are actually handled by a shared CSS background image that is quite small file size-wise, a two-color PNG. So that part's kind of clever and fun already. What the heck is this doing here? Does it mean anything? I realize that if we're treating this HTML as the source content, as the master content, if we translate it into another format, that dot is coming along for the ride. And my problem with this dot is this is not context independent. This dot is relevant for the particular HTML representation, perhaps, that I'm creating in, but it isn't part of the content. And I realize that my search for the nugget of core content involves finding that context-independent piece of it, and then only adding back the context-dependent or format-relevant pieces using that special sauce of metadata. Plus, I had a bit of a problem with this thought. These thoughts weren't trapped in the content. They were looming in my mind, and I was really worried that they would become the stuff of my future, even weirder dreams. I didn't want that at all. So maybe it's just me. Maybe I need training wheels before I'm allowed to write HTML because I'm sloppy or something. But I went back to a blank document and wrote this in plaintext Markdown. And then, instead, added those markers for those events into the special sauce for the site, so the CSS here. And in the end, had the same end result. And in case you're wondering, we did polyfill the hell out of things to get good support for CSS3 selectors across as many browsers as possible, but in the end, it's not even that important because that's not content. And if it doesn't render correctly, it doesn't matter as much. Because the main content is in such semantically decent HTML that it should be usable in basically any browser that's accessing it. So Sarah Wachter-Becher is a fellow traveler of mine. She, like me, is obsessed, or at least has an overbuying interest in adaptive content and the notion of content and content on the future of the web. She recently wrote an article for A List Apart containing this excerpt, which reads, in part, oh, my, that's up there. Whatever markup language you use, it's not semantic unless it pushes meaning forward, which is why you don't start with markup. You end up with it. And in my case, finding that context-free bit of chunk of core data, or core content, and then adding back the context-dependent elements to end up with my output markup. All right, so here it is, sort of nutshelled for you. I think of content on the web as being as format independent as possible without losing the ness of the original message. And circling back to why I chose Markdown, because it obviously is imperfect, it did give me that separation I needed between my content and its delivery. I was made sort of innocently blind to the way that this content would ever be visually represented, and it caused me to have some good habits. It made me think clearly. And likewise, Pandoc to me represents what I think might be the nascent rise of a series of internet babblefishes that can do this kind of translation between the different kinds of formats we're going to need to be able to serve to our different consumers. Babblefish. Okay, I think it's kind of cool. So, okay, this is all well and good. I'm glad I've had a little fun and done this experimentation on my little boutique site that is admittedly quite simple. But what about the real world? What do we do with the real-life, messy situation and structures we've got out there? The real world exists. It has these existing things. Are there things that we do that are applicable in like the actual real world that echo some of these sentiments of setting our content free? Things and tactics for creating a rather future flexible version of our content and making sure we're thinking about it? I think there's a few. And here's some tactics I'm going to talk about. By no means exhaustive. I call them the 5 S's. Separation, simplification, structure, standards, and mindfulness. I like to be alliterative. So a first step toward the future of our content, I think, is starting to think about our systems and disentangling our enmeshed deep systems. We have a lot of content management systems and other tools on the web that conflate all of these notions of so many processes of writing content, of managing content, of organizing content, of versioning it, of delivering it, of rendering it, of templating it. And they tend to be these giant monolithic pieces of software that are often confusing and totally confounding and sometimes quite mediocre. So we have this thing where we've conflated the notion of content authoring and content publishing, which makes it so that our content authoring ends are often making promises that the content publishing ends can't even uphold, especially going forward. We've created this myth of the preview button. Customers ask me now, oh, is there some way that I can preview all the stuff I'm creating to make sure it's going to look exactly like I want in all the different places it's going to end up, right? I have to shake my head no. And I get a little worried about questions like that because they smack of certain questions, of certain desires for a certain kind of pixel-perfect control over representation that we've never had. It's always been an illusion, and never more than it is now. I mean, our little example investigative site took baby steps toward this decoupling by separating the content from the metadata that translates it out to the appropriate format. Granted, yes, we are just building an HTML site, but it's a little baby step. Now, National Public Radio's COPE, Create Once, Publish Everywhere system gets mentioned a lot because it's amazing, and it's several years old now. I mean, they were way ahead of their time. They had this very complex set of things they were trying to do, many different sources of incoming content, many different places it needed to go. And they started compartmentalizing those processes building in a whole amazing amount of metadata that's beyond my ability to even describe. But they decoupled these things. I mean, the point being just that content authoring, content management, all these things, these are different things. And we can't keep them conflated into one system if we want to be successful on the web of the future. And this decoupling process is actually already starting to happen. We have a large corporate client who has one of the most immense CMSs I've ever seen. It's huge, it's complicated, it's sort of got this mainframe feel to it, but they're making huge steps. They are keeping their content authoring and versioning and management in the CMS, because that is the strength of the CMS. It's a content management system. But they are then making that content available on a completely different layer, where it can be accessed and used by different APIs to publish it out to different places that may need it in different ways. Steps are happening, things are happening. Now, their CMS happened to have a reasonably good track record of not doing terribly evil things to their source content, to not mushing too much markup into it. So their M&M situation was not catastrophic, but it wasn't perfect either. There are seriously image maps in their core content, pixel-based image maps. And then they've got some other like image assets and other big things and sort of presentation-y and flash things that just aren't going to translate out to the places they want to use it, like mobile being their obvious big target right now. And they've found that one of their best things they can do is start to think about simplifying their processes and also simplifying their content to achieve their goals. And like Brad was talking about, this notion of simplification, right? This is a common theme we're really hearing these days on the web. It's about really cutting the crap, getting rid of the stuff that just sucks, right? I mean, it's about focusing. At the Breaking Development Conference in Orlando, Florida a few weeks ago, Ethan Marcotte, the godfather, or the founding father, I guess, of responsive web design, gave a talk in which he used this maxim, simplify before you suppress. I'm quite fond of it. And I think there's a heck of a lot of suppression going on out there as organizations try to shoehorn their massive websites into mobile devices, right? So mobile has brought this to our attention. We're like, okay, we gotta really like slim things down and focus on it. But I think it speaks to a broader desire for simplification. And we're gonna need to do it for other things, and I think the need is broader. So this is the opposite of a simple experience, and I think it's actually hysterical. I actually forgot that Brad's slides also mention OregonLive.com, so it's pretty great. This is their desktop site. This is the landing page, right? I really hate this site, and I like passionately love to hate it because no one likes it, so it's kind of fun to get together and bash this site. Now, normally, and this is this is a local site, like I live in Oregon, so, and Brad does not. But basically, this is ostensibly a news site, but God forbid you actually go there and look for news. Like, it's sort of mind-bogglingly bad. This is just one little detail from the page. There's so much noise here. It's like, too bad I should come here seeking news, but you know, at least I know it's Steak Fest time in Portland, Oregon. I'm wildly excited about that. Now, not that it's just a massive redesign project or visual hierarchy reevaluation isn't necessary here, but if you just simply subtract out the content that isn't content, much like Brad did with that other site, you'll see that it actually starts naturally simplifying quite quickly. And I think that one day, someone came to the team at Oregon Live and said, holy crap, guys, there's like this iPhone thing, we totally need a mobile website. And I imagine this came as a huge shock to those poor bastards after years of cramming every imaginable piece of pap into their website, right? And the end result, even though it's crappy, kind of looks like it's the result of focusing and simplifying, right? I imagine the conversation went a little bit like this, you know, they were like kind of like, oh my, we can't possibly shove all that stupid crap out to mobile devices. It'll never fit, right? But yeah, well, we could get totally crazy and just give them the news. So this is the mobile website for OregonLive.com. And again, there's some certain distractions like, oh, download our app, here's an ad. But you do get right to news pretty quickly. And I'm not holding this mobile site up as a paradigm of mobile design or organization, but at least it does have news sites on it, right? And here's the top story under news. It's about a local guy who took a bad fall and is being airlifted out of a local community. So that should be also, right? If I go over to the desktop site, same site, within 10 seconds, where's that picture? Where is that story? Like, where to go? My goodness, it's nowhere to be seen. There's a whole lot of other crap, but not that story. Okay, I'll try to be clever. I'll click into the news section on this news site and look for the news, right? But first I get routed through this full-page stupid ad for an event I have no intention of attending and is 4 or 5 hours drive from where I live. Okay, click through. I get to the news page, and it still takes me a moment to find the goddamn story, okay? So, okay, I finally found it, but it's lost in a sea of noise. And I happen to think that maximalist sites like Oregon Live will become dinosaurs. Their fossilized remains serving as throwbacks, something we can sort of meditate upon in times of amusement or stress. And in their place, I foresee a new era of sites actually populated with the crap we want. The things that we want to come to the site and find, instead of the stuff that we want our users to want. It's like an editorial process. But really, if you find yourself being consistently pulling crap out as you're repurposing your stuff for other formats, maybe you should sit back and ask yourself why the hell it's there in the first place, right? Now, I'm not suggesting, yes, I know, very similar to Brad's line. I must have been somehow inspired. Not that I'm suggesting that everything needs to go away, that ads are going away, or that comments can never be useful, or there aren't other valuable pieces of content on the web besides the core content itself. But I do believe that the era of just indiscriminately stuffing crap into web pages is perhaps coming to a close. And then once we decide what content we want, we have to figure out how to put it together and break it down. How to break it down into the right kind of chunks, and so that we have the maximum amount of flexibility for putting it back together in the future in the ways that we might need it. And this is very complicated. Now, adaptive content expert Karen McGrain sees our current predicament as a fight between the blob and the chunk. And these chunks give us, these little bits of chunks are the good things, and the blobs, these long blobs of content, are what get us in trouble. You see, long blobs of content tend to view our web pages as these sort of frozen, controlled snapshots in time, like images or pages in a book. And this can get us in trouble. And the longer the blob, the more likely it is to need deconstruction to be adapted to other formats, right? The more likely it is to have M&M components to it. We lose our flexibility. Instead, adaptive web pages are created with these chunks of content that give us those options in the future. And then we can sprinkle them with metadata like magic to translate them out as we need. Now, I'm not going to say that figuring out how to structure your content is somehow easy. It's actually very, very difficult. There's no two ways about it. But getting out in front of it is the smart thing to do. I mean, we're starting to take the longer look of where our content is going to end up. We're thinking about mobile these days, how things will work on mobile. But it is a bigger view than that. It is much beyond mobile. And just as there is no one-size-fits-all design for websites, right? There is no single-use formula for how to put your content together and how to break it down. We do have some tools. Our CMSs and frameworks and tools increasingly allow us to create structured content. But these things cannot fly on autopilot. Just as you can't design a wonderful website without a skilled designer. And just like you can't build wonderful web software without a skilled web dev, you need experts helping you figure out how to think through your content and what it means and what it's built from. And while we're doing all this complicated thinking, while we're thinking about simplification and structure and separating our processes, we have to keep in mind this notion of standards, even when it hurts. Because we have to still have a standard way of communicating with each other and to the web. Otherwise, we're going to build a Tower of Babel that no Babelfish will be sophisticated enough to help us decipher. Now, I know it sometimes feels like an impossible weight for the things we need to help with the chaos that is now. But yet, scattershot, desperate tactics are not going to protect us and keep the ship from sinking forever. Your content is going to end up in a lot of places, and if you make proprietary, desperate decisions, you end up putting it in a dead end in a lot of cases. You M&M your content, so set it free. I mean, as the future-friendly manifesto reads in part, the standards process will be painfully slow. We will struggle with and eventually agree upon appropriate standards. But during this period, this web will fall even further behind proprietary solutions, and that is a downer. And yet, remember, you are not alone in this chaos. We are all there right now. And I actually think that this chaos in its own way will help to push forward the standards on the web and make them happen. So it seems like things can't hit browsers fast enough, but they are on the horizon. There's all sorts of great things that are coming to help us tame this chaos a little bit. So stay hopeful. And I do think I tend to mythologize standards creators. I picture them on a castle on a hill, like ninja hermits, creating these standards. I think I need to get over that a little bit. I mean, as a dev, I really want to help pave this two-way street. Give us the ability to figure out how to help each other. I mean, for devs, we need to pay attention and speak up. And for standards creators, I beg you, show us how to help you. Because I need to be shown the ropes. At least I do. I want to be able to understand how to get involved without losing my entire life to it. And through all of this, all the connecting things is that we just need to stay mindful. Really, a lot of this is about a state of mind, thinking about where our content's going to end up, treating it with showering it with the love and respect it deserves, Writing semantic HTML, which may sound obnoxiously pat, we won that fight, right? Just like we won optimized images, and everyone's doing that now without fail, right? No, we have to keep paying attention. We have to think about these things and not make the little mistakes and sloppiness that we have been. And for designers, keep pushing forward those great new workflows and thought processes like Steven has shown us, making designs that serve the content instead of the other way around. And we devs need to be wary of these silver bullet solutions, especially when they're proprietary. The web is messy and creative, and the best solutions will not be standing alone. They will be combined and community-based. So to come back to this notion, I believe that content is king. And content first to me is not just a nice-sounding phrase or buzz topic. I understand the complexity and the beauty and the importance of the content I'm working with. Like chocolate, it requires magic and beautiful ingredients to come out as well as it does. I mean, like chocolate, it is sorted and nurtured and dried and edited. I kind of think of this happening in this magical landscape of our imaginations with fantastic trees and abandoned buildings, much like there are near cocoa plantations as well. So, in my esteem, content is magical. It's much like chocolate in that way. It is not just the fodder for lorem ipsum text in our Photoshop mockups. And with that homage to content and chocolate aside, I want to urge you to continue thinking about these things, to think about the content of the future and helping to make it as future flexible as possible. And one day maybe it will grow up and it will understand what you've done for it and it will thank you. I believe the future of the web is totally freaking awesome. I am so glad to be here with you guys, and let's just keep it flexible and thoughtful. Thanks. I have time for one question. Not that maybe anyone has any. Anyone? Oh, come on, you guys. Nothing? All right, cool, fine. Oh, wait, I got one. Bitchin'. All right. Whew.
Hi, Lisa, right in the back here. CBS has been doing this for a while now, and then we actually tried it back around 2002 to 2003, where we had different sections of our content, and we asked our content people to actually split up their content, but they just denied to do it. They just didn't want to do it. So they just put it in the biggest field they could, and just stuff all their content in. They wanted to put it in there and be done with it. And yeah, it sounds like you're asking us to split our content up again and to ask them to split it up, and they'll just not do it.
I think there's two pieces of this. One is the current reality, which you now have, which is this giant blob of content, right? And that's your reality. Like, that's how it is, right? You can't jettison that. But as you're moving forward, I think part of the thing that we've ignored, especially as devs, because we all want to chunk this content, is we haven't thought about the mechanisms of how to actually involve the authors in this. We haven't built processes, forms, systems, backends in a way that is usable and meaningful. We just say, here's a bunch of fields, fill them out, do what you will, and there's sort of this imposing of this sort of technical structure upon these authors. And instead, I think the conversations that are better to have are with kind of including content architecture folks, including your authors, including your people, not just the dev team, to understand the kind of decisions you're making and actually help have them inform some of the decisions you are making about where this content is going to be used, and actually make sure that it's an understood like tactic or strategy instead of just saying, hey, we're doing this thing, we're chunking our content. If you bring people in and you show them where their content could end up and how magically flexible it could become by structuring it better, and you have the right kind of content structuring experts at your disposal, I think you can be successful, but it is a very challenging thing, and I appreciate your comment. So, okay, that was the only question I had time for, but since you are the person who asked the question, you win a book. So you can come up and get it whenever you want it. It's right here. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.